Hello and welcome to Mystery Manor Tales, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today we delve into the annals of my adventures with the incomparable Sherlock Holmes. I am Dr. John Watson, and what follows is a tale of terror veiled in crime, drawn from my private journals. Settle in, dear listener, as we journey back to the gaslit streets of Victorian London. Chapter 1. The Shadow at the Door. It was a night in late October of the year 1887 when the fog of London seemed less a meteorological phenomenon than a conspirator in some vast unspoken crime. The streets below Baker Street were muffled, the cries of the muffin man, the rattle of the omnibuses, even the shrill whistle of the crossing sweeper. All were swallowed by that yellow-gray pall which drifted in from the Thames like the breath of some ancient, malevolent river god. Within our modest sitting room at 221B, however, the atmosphere was one of comfortable domesticity, though I confess even then I sensed the approach of something darker than mere autumnal gloom. Sherlock Holmes reclined in the basket chair nearest the fire, his long legs stretched toward the fender, his dressing gown wrapped about him like the robes of some eastern sage. A thin spiral of blue smoke ascended from the bowl of his old black clay pipe, curling lazily toward the ceiling where it mingled with the haze of my own cigar. The violin lay upon the table beside him, its strings still vibrating faintly from a melancholy rendering of Lassus's Lamentations, which had occupied the previous hour. Holmes's eyes were half closed, yet I knew from long experience that behind those lids his mind was racing with the precision of a chronometer. I, Dr. John H. Watson, late of the Army Medical Department, sat opposite with a copy of The Lancet open upon my knee, though I confess my attention wandered from the article on tropical fevers to the more immediate mystery of my companion's mood. There are evenings when Holmes is as communicative as a child. There are others when he retreats into a silence so profound that the very ticking of the clock seems an intrusion. This was one of the latter. The fire settled with a soft cascade of sparks. I was on the point of suggesting a hand of whist, anything to break the spell, when a sharp, imperative knock resounded through the house. It was not the timid rap of a casual caller nor the measured tattoo of the postman, but a summons that carried with it the unmistakable accent of urgency. Holmes's eyes opened instantly, bright as a hawk's. "Ha!" he exclaimed, sitting upright. "At last, Watson, something to stir the stagnant air. Mrs. Hudson will be up in a moment. Pray compose yourself to receive our visitor with the gravity the occasion demands." Before I could frame a reply, the door opened to admit our landlady, her kindly face flushed with more than the exertion of the stairs. In her hand, she held a card upon a salver. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she said, a note of anxiety in her voice. He would give no name, only that the matter was of life and death. He is in a terrible state. Muddy boots, torn coat, and his eyes— She broke off with a little shiver. "Well, you had best see for yourselves." Holmes took the card and turned it to the light. It was of heavy cream stock, the edges frayed as though it had been carried in a trembling hand for many hours. Embossed upon it in severe copperplate were the words, "Reginald Hargrove, ESQ. Hargrove Manor, Whitechapel." "Whitechapel," murmured Holmes, a spark of interest kindling in his gray eyes. "And at this hour, admit him at once, Mrs. Hudson, and perhaps a drop of brandy. Our visitor appears to have traveled through more than mere fog." The landlady withdrew, and within moments the door was flung open with a violence that set the gas jets trembling. The man who entered was tall and well-made, perhaps 35 years of age. But at that instant he appeared a decade older. His dark hair was disheveled, his cheeks hollow, and his eyes, large, dark, and luminous with terror, darted about the room as though expecting some fresh horror to spring from the shadows. His overcoat, of expensive Melton cloth was spattered with mud to the knees. One glove was missing, and in his bare hand he clutched a crumpled telegram, which fluttered like a trapped bird. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he cried, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Thank heaven I have found you. They told me at the Yard you were the only man in London who might. His words failed him. He swayed, and I sprang forward to catch his arm. "Steady, sir," I said, guiding him to the sofa. "You are among friends. Watson, the brandy." Holmes had risen and now stood with his back to the fire, his lean figure silhouetted against the glowing coals. He regarded our visitor with that calm, penetrating gaze which I have seen reduce hardened criminals to stammering confusion. "Pray compose yourself, Mr. Hargrove," he said quietly. "You have evidently come through great distress. When you feel able to speak, begin at the beginning and omit nothing. The smallest detail may prove the hinge upon which the entire case turns." The stranger, Reginald Hargrove, as the card proclaimed, accepted the glass I pressed into his hand and drained it at a swallow. Color returned to his cheeks, and with it a measure of coherence. "You are kindness itself," he said, his voice steadier. "I hardly know where to begin. My brother, Sir Edmund Hargrove, he is dead. Murdered, Mr. Holmes, in circumstances so dreadful that the police refuse to credit them. They speak of suicide, of delusion, but I was there, sir. I heard the screams, I saw—" He broke off, pressing a hand to his eyes as though to shut out the memory. Holmes's eyebrows ascended a fraction. "A locked room, perhaps," he suggested softly. Hargrove stared at him, in astonishment. "How could you possibly—" "Yes, exactly." The study door was bolted from within, the windows barred and undisturbed. When we broke in, Edmund lay upon the rug, his throat torn as though by some wild beast, yet there was no creature in the room, only the idol, shattered beside him, and those dreadful scratches upon the floor. He fumbled in his pocket and produced a small object wrapped in silk. With trembling fingers he unfolded the cloth to reveal a fragment of jade, no larger than a sovereign, carved in the likeness of a squatting demon. Even in its broken state, the workmanship was exquisite, the emerald eyes seeming to pulse with malevolent life. "This," whispered Hargrove, "is all that remains of the horror of Carthage. My brother acquired it 3 weeks ago from a dealer in Limehouse. The man swore it carried a curse, that every previous owner had met a violent end. Edmund laughed at such superstition. He was a collector, you see, of the rare and the forbidden. But last night—" Holmes took the fragment and turned it beneath the gaslight. I saw his nostrils dilate and his eyes narrow as he examined the jade. "Exquisite," he murmured. "Early Ming, I should say, though the eyes are later insertions. Burmese emeralds, flawlessly cut, and these scratches upon the base, recent and deliberate. Pray continue, Mr. Hargrove." Our visitor drew a shuddering breath. It was past midnight. I had retired to my chamber on the floor above when I was awakened by the most appalling screams, inhuman, Mr. Holmes, as though some creature from the pit were being flayed alive. They came from Edmund's study. I rushed downstairs, hammering upon the door, but there was no reply save a dreadful gurgling sound. The butler and 2 footmen joined me. Together we forced the lock. The room was in darkness save for the dying fire. Edmund lay in the center of the rug, his dressing gown saturated with blood. His throat— Hargrove's voice cracked. It was torn open from ear to ear, yet the wounds were not those of a knife. They were ragged, as though made by claws. And upon the desk stood the idol, intact then, its eyes glowing as though lit from within. As we watched, it toppled from its pedestal and shattered upon the floor. That was when the screaming stopped. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the ill-fitting window. Holmes, however, appeared unmoved save for a slight tightening of the lips. "And the police?" he inquired. "Inspector Lestrade arrived at dawn. He examined the room, the body, The fragments of jade. He found no weapon, no trace of an intruder. The windows were fastened with patent locks of Edmund's own invention. The chimney is too narrow even for a child. Lestrade pronounced it suicide, said my brother must have taken poison and in his delirium inflicted the wounds upon himself with some instrument since vanished. But I know Edmund, Mr. Holmes, he was not a man to take his own life. And those scratches upon the floorboards, they were not random. They formed a pattern, a circle with curious symbols within. I have seen similar marks in books of forbidden lore. Holmes handed the jade fragment to me. I turned it in my fingers and felt an unaccountable thrill of dread. The stone was warm, impossible yet undeniably so. Your brother collected such volumes? Holmes asked. Dozens. The study is a veritable museum of the occult. There is one shelf devoted entirely to the cults of Central Asia. Edmund believed the idol to be the centerpiece of his collection, the very embodiment of the Carthage demon said to devour the souls of the unworthy. Holmes paced to the window and stood looking out upon the fog-bound street. For a long moment he was silent, his profile sharp against the gloom. Then he turned, and I saw the familiar gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Watson," said he, "pack your revolver and a clean collar. We leave for Whitechapel at first light. Mr. Hargrove, you will oblige us by remaining in town tonight. There is an excellent hotel in the Strand where you may find rest. I will require access to Hargrove Manor tomorrow, and your presence to point out any details which may have escaped the official eye." Hargrove rose, a flicker of hope illuminating his haggard features. "You will take the case, then?" "My dear sir," replied Holmes with a wintry smile, "I have taken it from the moment you crossed my threshold. The curiosity of the locked room is irresistible. The suggestion of an Oriental curse merely adds piquancy. But mark this. Whatever agency, human or otherwise, has brought about your brother's death, it shall not escape the net of reason." As our visitor departed, clutching his hat like a drowning man a spar, I turned to Holmes with 100 questions trembling upon my lips. He forestalled me with a gesture. "Not yet, Watson. The game is afoot, but the board is not yet fully revealed. Tomorrow we shall examine the terrain. Tonight—" He reached for his violin and drew the bow across the strings in a slow, mournful cadence that seemed to echo the very soul of the fog-shrouded city beyond our walls. I retired to my room, but sleep was long in coming. Through the thin partition I could hear the strains of Holmes's improvisations, now wild and discordant, now soft as a lullaby, until at last the bough fell silent and the house settled into stillness. Outside, the fog pressed closer, and somewhere in its depths I fancied I heard the faint, triumphant laugh of something ancient and evil, awaiting the dawn. Chapter 2. Whispers in the fog. The morning was raw, the sort of London dawn that creeps into the bones and lingers there. Sherlock Holmes and I had left Baker Street at first light, fortified by Mrs. Hudson's strong coffee and the knowledge that we were bound for the heart of a mystery. The fog, far from lifting, had thickened during the night. It rolled in great billows from the river, swallowing the spires of churches and the masts of ships alike. Our cab deposited us before the gates of Hargrove Manor with a splash of muddy water, and as the horse clopped away, the silence that followed was almost tangible. Reginald Hargrove awaited us on the steps, his face gaunt in the gray light. He had exchanged last night's disarray for morning black, yet the effect was scarcely less alarming. The coat hung upon him as though grief had devoured the flesh beneath. "You are punctual, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice a hollow echo of the man who had burst into our rooms. "The house is yours. The servants have been instructed to answer every question." Holmes inclined his head. "Excellent. Lead on, sir, and pray keep nothing back. The smallest domestic detail may prove the key." We passed beneath a portico where stone gargoyles leered down, their mouths stopped with soot. The front door, solid oak banded with iron, groaned upon its hinges, and we stepped into a hall that smelled of beeswax, damp, and something faintly metallic. Portraits of the Hargrove line glared from the walls. Merchants, admirals, one bewigged judge with a face like a hanging magistrate. Their eyes seemed to follow us as we ascended the grand staircase, our footsteps muffled by a runner of Turkey carpet worn thin in the center. "The study is at the rear," murmured our client, overlooking the garden. Edmund prized the light, or lack of it, claiming the gloom was conducive to contemplation. Holmes's lips twitched. A singular taste in illumination. The corridor above was narrower, paneled in dark wood that drank the gaslight. A suit of Japanese armor stood sentinel at one corner, its lacquered mask grinning vacantly. At the far end, a baize door had been propped open with a brass candlestick. Beyond it lay the scene of the tragedy. Holmes paused upon the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room with the precision of a surveyor. I saw his nostrils flare as he inhaled the atmosphere. Stale tobacco, candle smoke, and beneath it all the sweet, sickly tang of blood long dried. He stepped forward, careful to avoid the chalk, and knelt beside the shattered idol. The fragments lay where they had fallen, a mosaic of jade and malice. The demon's torso was split cleanly as though by a single blow. The head had rolled beneath the desk, one emerald eye staring sightlessly at the wainscot. Holmes produced his lens and bent low. "Observe, Watson," he said softly. "The fracture is not random. See how the edges align? A deliberate strike, delivered with force sufficient to shatter jade yet not disturb the surrounding bric-a-brac. Curious." I joined him, my medical eye drawn to the chalk outline. The position of the body, arms flung wide, knees bent, suggested a fall from the desk chair. Dark stains radiated from the throat area, absorbed deep into the wool. "The wounds were extensive," I murmured, "yet the volume of blood is less than one might expect from such lacerations." "Precisely." Holmes's voice was a whisper of satisfaction. "Post-mortem mutilation, I shouldn't wonder. But let us examine the famous scratches." He moved to the floorboards before the fireplace. There, gouged into the oak as though by a frenzied hand, was the circle Hargrove had described. It measured perhaps 18 inches across, the lines deep and wavering, yet unmistakably deliberate. Within the circumference were symbols, angular, archaic, defying immediate recognition. Holmes traced them with a gloved finger. Not random mania, the hand that made these was steady, the tool sharp, a chisel perhaps, or a burin. And the wood is oak, English, seasoned. These marks are fresh. The sap still bleeds. Reginald Hargrove hovered in the doorway, his face a study in dread. Edmund was at his desk when I last saw him alive. "Writing letters," he said. "The idol stood upon its pedestal there." He indicated a mahogany plinth beside the globe. He had been corresponding with a scholar in Prague regarding its provenance. Holmes rose swiftly. "The letters, where are they?" "Confiscated by the police." Lestrade was most thorough. A flicker of annoyance crossed my friend's features. "No matter. We shall manage without the official gaze." He turned to the windows, tall, narrow, secured by patent locks of intricate design. "Your brother's invention?" Hargrove nodded. "He was something of an amateur engineer. The mechanism is unique. The key is required both to lock and unlock from within." Holmes tested the nearest casement. It resisted, then yielded with a soft click. "Unique, perhaps, but not infallible. Note the scratch upon the brass, recent and corresponding to a tool of narrow blade." He closed the window and relocked it, pocketing the motion in his memory. We spent the next hour in meticulous examination. I noted the absence of footprints in the thick dust of the hearth. Holmes cataloged the contents of the desk. Ink pots, sealing wax, a half-written treatise on demonology. Beneath a blotter he discovered a single sheet of rice paper folded small. Unfolding it revealed a crude map of Whitechapel, certain streets marked in red. "Smuggling routes?" I ventured. "Or something older," Holmes replied. "The ink is fresh, the hand educated but hurried. Our scholar in Prague, perhaps." A sudden clamor in the hall interrupted us. The butler, a stooped figure with the pallor of one who has seen ghosts, appeared, wringing his hands. "Begging your pardon, sir, but there's a person at the kitchen door. Insists on speaking with Mr. Reginald. Says it's about the master's death." Hargrove paled. "Show him up." The newcomer was a sorry specimen, a costermonger in a frayed muffler, his eyes red-rimmed with gin or grief. He clutched a battered cap and addressed Hargrove in a hoarse whisper. "It's about the Chinaman, sir, the one what sold the idol. He's been asking questions. Says the curse ain't finished." Holmes stepped forward, his voice gentle yet commanding. "Your name?" "Jem Briggs, sir. I works the docks. Saw the transaction meself 3 weeks back in the Blue Anchor. The Chinaman had a scar like a lightning bolt across his cheek. Said the idol would bring riches to the bold and death to the greedy." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And this Chinaman, where might he be found?" Briggs shrank back. "Limehouse, sir. But you don't want to go there after dark. They say the horror walks the fog looking for fresh blood." Holmes dismissed him with a coin and a warning to hold his tongue. As the door closed, he turned to Hargrove. "Your brother's rivals. Name them." "There is Dr. Elias Thorne of Mayfair, a collector of Orientalia. He and Edmund quarreled bitterly over the idol's price. Thorne vowed to possess it at any cost." Holmes nodded. "Then to Mayfair we shall go. But first—" He knelt once more beside the shattered demon, fitting 2 fragments together with a soft click. The emerald eyes aligned, and for an instant I could have sworn they glowed. "First, we take the measure of the horror itself." Chapter 3. The Crimson Clue. We returned to Baker Street in the failing light, the hansom's wheels drumming a tattoo upon the wet cobbles. The day's discoveries lay between us like a third passenger. Silent, heavy, and full of unspoken menace. Holmes had spoken little during the journey from Whitechapel. His eyes were fixed upon some inner vision, and I knew better than to intrude upon the workings of that extraordinary mind. Only when the cab deposited us at our door did he rouse himself. "Watson," said he, tossing a coin to the driver, "we have much to do and little time. The tide of events moves swiftly, and we must be ahead of it." Mrs. Hudson met us in the hall with a tray of cold beef and pickles, but Holmes waved it aside. "Later, my good woman. First, the photographs." He led the way upstairs, where the sitting room had become a laboratory of deduction. Upon the table lay the official police images of the crime scene, stark, merciless, and infinitely revealing. Holmes seized the largest print. Sir Edmund Hargrove sprawled upon the rug, throat laid open in a ragged grin. The flash powder had bleached the blood to black, but the pattern was unmistakable. I bent closer, my medical training asserting itself. "Observe the edges," I said. "Jagged yet curiously uniform. Not the work of claws, too regular for that. And see here." I indicated a series of parallel incisions along the sternocleidomastoid. "These are post-mortem. No vital reaction, no bruising. The heart had ceased to beat before the wounds were inflicted." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Capital, Watson. You have the eye of a pathologist. The police saw only horror. You see sequence. Poison first, mutilation after. But what poison?" He swept the photographs aside and produced the jade fragment from his pocket. Beneath the strong lens of his pocket microscope, he examined the broken edge where the idol had shattered. Ah, as I suspected. A residue, crystalline, almost invisible. Pass me the reagent bottle, third shelf left of the skull. I obeyed and watched as he scraped a minute quantity of powder onto a glass slide. A drop of clear fluid produced an immediate reaction. The crystals dissolved into a vivid crimson, spreading like blood in water. Hemotoxic, murmured Holmes. Derived from the sap of the upas tree, if I am not mistaken. A Javanese speciality. Paralyses the respiratory center within minutes. Odorless, tasteless, and in this concentration, lethal. Your brother, Mr. Hargrove, was dead before he struck the floor. Reginald Hargrove, who had followed us from Whitechapel at Holmes's insistence, sank into a chair. Poisoned? But how administered? Edmund dined alone that night, oysters and a bottle of 76 claret. The servants swear the seals were intact. Holmes paced, his dressing gown swirling like a storm cloud. The idol itself, perhaps. A hollow base, a spring mechanism. Child's play to the right craftsman. But let us consider the crimson dye upon the base. Watson, your opinion? I took the fragment. Beneath the gaslight, I discerned a faint stain, no larger than a sixpence, the color of fresh arterial blood. Not blood, I said slowly. Too glossy, and the hue is wrong. A pigment? Precisely. Cochineal, refined with gum arabic and a trace of arsenic to fix the color. Used by forgers of Oriental manuscripts to simulate age. I have seen it in the British Museum's conservation laboratory. Holmes crossed to his chemical corner and returned with a small vial. A sample from my own stores. Observe. He touched a drop to the stained jade. The crimson dissolved, revealing beneath it a faint inscription. Characters so minute they were invisible to the naked eye. Holmes adjusted the microscope and beckoned me closer. Early Ming Dynasty, he whispered, but the inscription is modern, cut with a diamond point. It reads, "The horror feeds on greed, a warning or a boast." A sudden rap at the door heralded the arrival of Inspector Lestrade, his rat-like features sharpened by professional jealousy. "Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, "I must protest. This is a police matter." "Your protest is noted," interrupted Holmes smoothly. "But consider this. Your suicide theory collapses beneath the weight of poison and forgery. Sir Edmund was murdered, and the murderer left his signature in crimson." Lestrade snorted. "Fancy talk. The room was locked, the windows barred, no one entered or left." "Yet someone did," replied Holmes, "and I intend to prove it. Come, Watson. We pay a call upon Dr. Elias Thorne." Thorne received us in a room that might have been the twin of Sir Edmund's study, save for the absence of blood. His eyes, pale and penetrating, flicked from Holmes to me with the wariness of a duelist. "Mr. Holmes," he said coldly, "your reputation precedes you. I trust this is not another of Edmund Hargrove's practical jokes." "Alas, no," replied my friend. "Sir Edmund is beyond jests. We investigate his murder." Thorne's composure wavered for an instant. "Murder? The police are mistaken. Tell me, Doctor, when last did you see the idol of Carthage?" A flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossed the scholar's face. 3 weeks ago at the auction rooms in Limehouse, Hargrove outbid me, paid a king's ransom for a worthless bauble." "Worthless?" Holmes produced the jade fragment. "Yet you coveted it sufficiently to quarrel publicly." Thorne's hand went to a drawer, then withdrew. "A scholarly disagreement, nothing more. I have my own collection." He gestured to the shelves, idols, fetishes, a jade dagger with a hilt of human bone. Holmes's gaze swept the room like a searchlight. "Indeed. And this?" From a side table he lifted a small bottle. its contents the exact crimson of the stain upon the idol. Thorne started forward, but Holmes held it to the light. "Coach Anil Dye, Doctor, the forger's friend. You have been busy." "It is for my work," snapped Thorne. "Restoring manuscripts. Hargrove accused me of forging provenance for the idol. Slanderous nonsense." "Yet the die matches," persisted Holmes. "And your quarrel was witnessed by half of Limehouse. You vowed to possess the idol at any cost." Thorne's face darkened. "I am a scholar, not a murderer. If you seek villains, look to Hargrove's own household. His brother Reginald inherits everything. Motive enough, I should say." Holmes smiled thinly. "A palpable red herring, Doctor, but we shall see." As we took our leave, I noticed a glint of metal beneath the blotter, a key identical to the one that locked Sir Edmund's study from within. In the hansom, Holmes was exultant. "Two motives, Watson: greed and revenge. But the crimson dye is the thread that binds them. Thorne forges, Hargrove collects. Between them a conspiracy of counterfeit curses. Yet the poison remains the crux. Tomorrow we return to the manor at midnight. The horror, I fancy, keeps nocturnal hours. Chapter 4. Echoes from the alley. The clock upon the mantel had scarcely chimed 11 when Holmes declared our departure. "The manor by day is a museum, Watson. By night a confession. We shall enter unobserved and listen for the house to speak." Mrs. Hudson's protests were silenced by the gravity in his voice. Within minutes we were bowling through the deserted streets, the fog so dense that the cab's lamps carved only a trembling cone of light. Holmes sat forward, eyes gleaming beneath the brim of his deerstalker. "Two threads now tangle," he murmured. "The crimson dye links Thorne to forgery. The upas poison suggests an Eastern supplier. Limehouse is the knot. Tonight we cut it." The blue anchor squatted at the end of a blind alley, its windows opaque with grime. A sailor staggered out, retching into the gutter. Inside, the taproom was a bedlam of smoke and shouts, dockers, lascars, a one-eyed fiddler sawing a jig. Holmes ordered 2 mugs of porter and led me to a corner table where the shadows pooled deepest. "Observe," he whispered. "Third man from the bar, scar like a lightning bolt. Our Chinaman." The fellow was lean, his pigtail coiled beneath a wool cap. His eyes, black and unreadable, flicked toward us, then away. Holmes raised his mug in salute. The man stiffened, then melted into the crowd. "Follow," said Holmes, rising. We emerged into the alley as the Chinaman vanished round a bend. The fog swallowed sound. Our footsteps were muffled, yet every splash seemed a gunshot. Holmes's lantern threw a thin blade of light ahead. Suddenly a shape detached itself from the wall, a burly ruffian in a pea-jacket, cudgel raised. "'Ere, nosy Parkers," he began. Holmes's stick flashed. The cudgel clattered to the stones. I seized the man's collar, my service revolver at his temple. "Name and business," I snapped. "Easy, Doctor," growled the ruffian. "Jem sent me. Briggs from the docks. Said you was asking after the idol. There's them what don't like questions." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Lead on, then. But mark me, no tricks." The man, calling himself Silas Crow, guided us through a maze of courts and passages until the river's stench told us we neared the docks. Warehouses loomed like cliffs. Rat lines creaked overhead. At length we halted before a shuttered chandler's shop. Crow produced a key and beckoned us within. The interior was a chaos of crates and cobwebs. A single candle guttered upon a barrel. There sat the Chinaman, flanked by 2 silent companions. Upon the barrel lay a familiar object, a second idol, intact, its emerald eyes malevolent in the flickering light. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said the Chinaman in perfect English, "you trespass upon dangerous ground." Holmes bowed slightly. "Knowledge is my trade, sir. The idol upon Hargrove's desk was a forgery. Your work? A thin smile. A copy, yes, the original is elsewhere. Sir Edmund paid for authenticity. He received a warning. Greed devours itself. And the poison? I demanded. Upas is costly. The buyer provided it. Through Dr. Thorne's laboratory, I believe. Holmes stepped closer. You supplied the means, Thorne the motive, and Reginald Hargrove the opportunity, but the locked room, how? The Chinaman's smile widened. A simple trick. A thread through the keyhole, a wait time to fall. The door locks itself after the murderer departs. Child's play to one who knows the old arts. Crow shifted uneasily. Enough talk. The boss wants the jade back, says the curse ain't done. Holmes's hand moved like lightning. The lantern crashed, plunging us into darkness. Shouts, the crash of crates, the sharp report of my revolver. When I relit the lamp, the Chinaman and his guards had vanished, leaving only the idol, and upon the floor a torn kid glove monogrammed R.H. Reginald Hargrove, murmured Holmes. The glove from the manor, identical leather, identical stitching. Our client is not the bereaved brother, but the architect of the crime. I stared, aghast. But the distress, the telegram, acting, Watson, superb acting. He staged the horror to claim the inheritance and silence Thorne's accusations of forgery. The Chinaman was a hired distraction, the curse a smoke screen. Holmes paced, energy crackling. The scratches upon the floor, Reginald's own hand guiding the chisel to spell the warning. The idol shattered by a weighted line from the chimney. The poison administered in the claret, Upas dissolves invisibly, and the locked door. He demonstrated with string and a paperweight, the bolt sliding home with a click. Yet why the mutilation? I asked. To sell the curse. A clean poison death invites scrutiny. A beast's attack terrifies witnesses into silence. A sudden knock, Mrs. Hudson with a telegram. Holmes tore it open. Meet me at the manor midnight. I know the truth. R.H. Holmes's smile was grim. The spider invites the fly. We accept, Watson, but with precautions. Chapter 5. The Phantom's Trail. Holmes had spent the morning in a fever of preparation. Maps of Whitechapel's sewers, tide tables, a dog-eared copy of the Golden Bough. All lay scattered across the table like the entrails of some dissected mystery. At noon he announced our destination with the air of a general unveiling a campaign. Madame Seraphina, he declared, holds seances for the Mayfair set. Thorne attends regularly. Reginald Hargrove was a recent convert. Tonight she will conjure the spirit of Sir Edmund. We shall be there, incognito. The transformation was swift. My friend's lean frame disappeared beneath padding and a false paunch. A ginger mustache and gold-rimmed spectacles completed the illusion. I, with a dog collar and a pair of steel-rimmed glasses, became the Reverend Dr. Verity, a country parson seeking guidance for a troubled flock. Thus arrayed, we took a cab to Belgravia, arriving as the street lamps flared into life. Madame Seraphina received us in a vestibule hung with astrological charts. She was a woman of middle years, handsome in a theatrical way, with raven hair and eyes like wet slate. Her gaze lingered on Holmes's disguise, but greed overcame suspicion. 2 guineas each, she murmured, and absolute silence during the manifestations. We were ushered into the parlor. 3 others already sat at the table. Dr. Elias Thorne, gaunt and restless, a dowager in bombazine, and, to my astonishment, Reginald Hargrove, pale as parchment, his eyes ringed with sleepless violet. Holmes's fingers tightened on my sleeve. Steady, Watson. Madame extinguished all but the candelabrum, then took her place at the table's head. A tambourine, a slate, and a small handbell rested before her. Join hands, she intoned. The veil is thin tonight. Sir Edmund Hargrove walks among us. The circle closed. I felt the dowager's rings bite into my palm. On my other side, Holmes's grip was cool and steady. The room grew colder. The candles dipped as though a draft had entered, though the windows were sealed. Madame's head fell back, her voice dropped to a guttural whisper. "Edmund, speak. Your brother calls." A bell tinkled, unseen. The tambourine rose, spun, and settled with a soft thud. Thorne started. Hargrove's breath hissed between his teeth. "Blood," Madame moaned. "I see blood upon the rug, claws. The idol's eyes glow red." Holmes's pressure on my hand increased now. Beneath the table, my foot found a loose floorboard. I pressed gently. A faint click. At the same moment, Holmes's free hand moved beneath the cloth, producing a small vial. He uncorked it. A thread of luminous paint, phosphorus dissolved in oil, traced a spectral hand upon the slate. The dowager screamed. The candles flared, then guttered. In the Stygian gloom, a shape materialized above the table. A translucent figure in a blood-stained dressing gown, throat torn, eyes burning emerald. It pointed a wavering finger at Reginald Hargrove. "Murderer!" The voice was Madame's, yet distorted, as though spoken through water. "You poisoned me for gold." Hargrove leapt to his feet, overturning his chair. "Lies! It was the curse!" Holmes rose, shedding his disguise like a snake its skin. "No curse, Mr. Hargrove. Only chemistry and greed." He seized the tambourine. A fine thread ran from it to Madame's sleeve. "Wire and magnets, Madame. Your spirit is a projection upon cigar smoke, clever but detectable to one who knows the stage magician's art." Thorne stared, comprehension dawning. You staged the haunting to drive Reginald to confession?" "Precisely," said Holmes, "though I confess the luminous paint was an improvisation. Watson, the lights." I found the gas jet. Yellow flame banished the shadows. The phantom resolved into a gauze screen suspended from the ceiling, its image cast by a concealed magic lantern. Madame Seraphina slumped, defiance crumbling. "It was Reginald's idea," she muttered. "He paid me £50 to terrify the household, make them believe the idol's curse was real. The scratches, the screams, all arranged." Hargrove made for the door, but Holmes was swifter. A neat trip, a twist of the arm, and my revolver pressed against the murderer's spine. "Reginald Hargrove," said Holmes formally, "I arrest you for the murder of your brother, Sir Edmund. The locked room was your contrivance. A thread through the keyhole, a weight timed to fall after you left. The idol contained the Upa's poison, released when your brother lifted it to admire the new acquisition. The mutilation you inflicted yourself, using the jade dagger from Thorne's collection to simulate the curse." Thorne rose, trembling with rage. "You used my dagger? You forged my provenance to drive up the price, then murdered to conceal the fraud?" Hargrove laughed, a dreadful, broken sound. "Edmund discovered the idol was counterfeit. He threatened to expose us both. I had no choice." Back at Baker Street, the fire crackled high. Holmes filled his pipe with Arcadian mixture, his eyes bright with satisfaction. "The phantom's trail led us to the heart of the maze, Watson. Greed, forgery, and fratricide, classic motives in modern dress. The seance was the final act. Hargrove's terror at confronting his victim broke him as surely as any rack." I poured 2 whiskeys. "Yet the Chinaman, the smuggling." "A blind. The idol was smuggled, yes, but empty. Reginald filled it with poison from Thorne's laboratory, using the forgery scandal as leverage. Thorne suspected, but lacked proof. Until tonight." Holmes raised his glass. "To reason, Watson. It dispels even the most artful phantoms." Outside, the fog had lifted entirely. The first rays of sun gilded the rooftops. London awoke, unaware that one of its darkest shadows had been banished by the light of deduction. Chapter 6. Secrets in the Seance. The confession had begun, but the full tapestry of deceit required more than Madame Seraphina's tearful admissions. Holmes, ever the inquisitor, pressed Reginald Hargrove with the calm of a surgeon dissecting a cadaver. "Begin with the idol's arrival," he commanded. "Every detail." Hargrove's shoulders sagged. The fight had bled from him like air from a punctured bellows. 3 weeks ago," he said, voice hollow. "A crate from Limehouse, marked porcelain. Inside, the idol wrapped in silk. Edmund was exultant. He believed it genuine Ming. I knew better. Thorne had sold him a forgery the year before, a jade Buddha with a hollow base. Edmund never noticed the difference." Holmes nodded. "And the poison?" "Upas crystals dissolved in oil. Thorne kept a vial in his laboratory labeled specimen preservative. I stole it during a visit. The idol's base unscrewed. I filled the cavity, sealed it with wax. A spring mechanism, Edmund's own design for a music box, would release the poison when the idol was lifted to eye level. He always did that, held treasures close to study the carving. I felt a chill. A death trap disguised as a collector's quirk." "Precisely," said Holmes. "And the mutilation?" Hargrove's lips curled in a bitter smile. "Edmund was already dead when I re-entered. The thread, through the keyhole, let me draw the bolt after me. I used Thorne's jade dagger, stolen the same night, to slash the throat. The scratches on the floor I carved with a cold chisel, copying symbols from a book in Edmund's own library. I wanted the servants to believe the curse had come alive." Madame Seraphina stirred. "He paid me to amplify the terror. Whispers in the walls, blood on the mirror, simple tricks with phosphorus and a speaking tube. The seance was to be the final touch. Edmund's spirit accusing Reginald, driving him to madness or flight. Instead," she glanced at Holmes with something like admiration, "you turned the trap upon its maker." Holmes waved a dismissive hand. "Child's play. The gauze screen, the magic lantern, standard music hall illusions. The luminous paint was merely the flourish. But the smuggling, Hargrove, why involve the Chinaman?" "A blind," Hargrove admitted. "The original idol was smuggled, yes, opium in the base. But I replaced the drugs with poison. The Chinaman was paid to spread tales of the curse, to keep suspicion from the house. Thorne believed the idol genuine. He would have exposed the forgery if Edmund lived to compare it with his earlier purchase." Back in the parlor, Thorne rose, trembling with rage. "You used my dagger, my reputation, to murder your own brother? I suspected the idol was false, but to frame me—" "You were a convenience," sneered Hargrove. "Your quarrel with Edmund was public. When the police found your die on the base, your dagger in the wounds, who would look further?" Holmes interposed himself between the men. "Enough. The chain is complete. Watson, the evidence." I produced the torn glove from the blue anchor, the crimson-stained vial from Thorne's drawer, the thread spool found in Hargrove's pocket. Each item laid upon the table like a card in a winning hand. Lestrade arrived with 2 constables summoned by Holmes's earlier whistle. Hargrove was led away without resistance, his eyes fixed on some private abyss. Madame Seraphina followed, weeping, her career in ruins. Thorne lingered, staring at the dismantled phantom. "You have saved me from the gallows, Mr. Holmes," he said quietly, "yet ruined my collection's reputation. The idol was false, my scholarship tainted." "Better a live scholar than a dead dupe," replied Holmes. "The jade is yours by right. Sell it as a curiosity, not a relic. Truth is the only genuine antiquity." Over breakfast, Holmes reviewed the case with satisfaction. "The seance was the keystone, Watson. Without it, Hargrove's nerve might have held. Fear of the supernatural, man's oldest weakness, proved his undoing. I buttered a muffin. Yet the Chinaman escapes. For now. The opium trail will lead Scotland Yard to him in time. Our concern was murder, not smuggling. Holmes tapped the jade box. This fragment will convict Hargrove. The rest is epilogue. Mrs. Hudson entered with the Morning Post. Among the letters, a small parcel addressed to Holmes in spidery script. He opened it cautiously. Inside lay a second jade fragment, matching the first, wrapped in rice paper. A single character was inked upon the paper. Z. C.A. Thanks. The Chinaman's calling card, murmured Holmes. A gentleman in his fashion. He approves our resolution. I laughed, though uneasily. A curious alliance. Reason recognizes reason, Watson, even across the gulf of crime. Outside, London stirred, costermongers' cries, the rumble of omnibuses, the distant whistle of a train. The fog had vanished entirely. The sky was a clear, cold blue. Somewhere in the city, a murderer awaited the gallows, a medium-faced ruin, and a scholar rebuilt his reputation upon truth. The horror of Carthage was revealed as mere human malice, its emerald eyes forever dimmed. Holmes raised his cup. To the next impossible case. I echoed the toast, though my thoughts lingered on the jade fragment's faint warmth against my palm. A reminder that some secrets, even exposed, retain a whisper of the uncanny. Chapter 7: The Locked Chamber. Holmes had insisted upon a midnight reconstruction. The locked room is the heart of the illusion, he told Lestrade. Let us dissect it before the jury of common sense. We gathered in the study, Lestrade, notebook poised, the constables stolid as bookends, Hargrove, wrists manacled, Watson with revolver and dark lantern. The air was colder than the grave. Frost feathered the window panes despite the season. Holmes moved to the door and closed it with deliberate care. Observe, he began, voice crisp as winter steel. Bolt on the inside, key in the lock. Standard Yale pattern modified by Sir Edmund's patent. The police found it locked. The key was on the desk. No duplicate exists. Yet the murderer entered, poisoned his victim, mutilated the corpse, carved occult symbols, and departed, leaving the door bolted behind him. Impossible, only to those who trust the evidence of their eyes. He produced a spool of black silk thread, finer than a hair, from his waistcoat. Reginald, you will demonstrate. Hargrove's lip curled, but the constable's grip tightened. With ill grace, he took the thread. Holmes indicated the keyhole. Pass the thread through, thus. A loop emerged on the corridor side. Now tie the bolt's knob. Excellent. Watson, the weight. I handed him a small lead fishing sinker, no larger than a walnut. Holmes attached it to the thread's free end and let it dangle through the keyhole. The weight swung gently, then settled. Time, 11:52, Holmes announced. Sir Edmund lifts the idol, poison released. He collapses. Reginald, listening in the corridor, waits 30 seconds for death to be certain. Then, he gave the thread a sharp tug from inside the room. The weight rose, pulling the bolt across with a soft snick. The door was locked. Lestrade's eyebrows ascended. But the thread, someone would see it. Holmes smiled. Not if the murderer retrieves it. He opened the door. The weight now hung on the corridor side. A second tug drew the thread entirely through the keyhole, coiling it neatly into Hargrove's waiting palm. The door remained bolted, the key untouched on the desk. Child's play, murmured Holmes. The weight is timed by the pendulum swing. 30 seconds from release to bolt. Reginald practiced in his own room for weeks. The poison chamber, Holmes continued. Capacity, 1 dram. Upas oil, viscous enough to cling, lethal in micrograms. The spring was Edmund's own, intended for a singing bird automaton. Reginald adapted it. When the idol is tilted past 45 degrees, he demonstrated. The drop fell. Death within 90 seconds. Hargrove stared at the floor. He admired every new piece that way, he muttered. Held it to the lamp. I knew he would. Holmes crossed to the fireplace. The occult circle had been scrubbed, but faint scars remained. He knelt, produced a chisel from his pocket, and tapped the boards. English oak, quarter sawn. These grooves required pressure, 3 pounds per square inch, not the work of a dying man in convulsions. He carved a quick crescent. The wood resisted exactly as the original marks had. Time to carve the circle, 4 minutes. Reginald entered after the poison took effect, performed the mutilation, carved the symbols, shattered the idol with a weighted line from the chimney. He pointed to a faint abrasion on the mantel. Then exited, drawing the bolt behind him. Total time inside after death, 7 minutes. The household heard screams because Reginald provided them, through a speaking tube concealed in the wainscot. Lestrade whistled. The butler swore the screams came from the room. They did, after a fashion. The tube runs to the servants' stair. Reginald stationed a confederate, Madame Seraphina's assistant, to wail at the appropriate moment. The tube was removed before dawn, the plaster repaired. Hargrove laughed, a cracked, despairing sound. You missed nothing, Mr. Holmes, nothing. Not quite, replied my friend. The jade dagger, thorns. How did you return it? Posted it to myself the next morning, wrapped as a gift from a well-wisher. The police never opened the parcel. I retrieved it from the hall table. Holmes turned to the windows. And the bars? Patent locks? Red herrings. The bars are decorative. Brass tubes over wood. A child could bend them. But no one tested. The locked door was sufficient miracle. He moved to the desk, opened the central drawer, and withdrew a folded sheet, rice paper, the map we had glimpsed earlier. Smuggling routes, yes, but also the escape plan. Had the curse failed to convince, Reginald intended to flee to Buenos Aires on the SS Magdalena, sailing at high tide the morning after the murder. Ticket booked in the name of Mr. R. Carver. Lestrade snapped his notebook shut. Enough. The jury will hang him on the thread alone. Holmes surveyed the room one last time. The locked chamber is no longer a mystery, merely a stage. The props are dismantled, the actor unmasked. Let us leave the ghosts to their rest. Back at Baker Street, the fire burned low. Holmes filled his pipe with the last of the Arcadian mixture, his eyes reflective. The locked room, he mused, is the criminal's vanity. He believes the impossible will shield him from scrutiny. Yet every impossibility is merely a problem in mechanics, chemistry, and human weakness. I poured 2 fingers of whiskey. And the moral? Holmes smiled faintly. That the greatest horror is not the supernatural, but the brother who poisons for gold. Reason locks the door. Greed provides the key. Outside, the city slept. Somewhere in Newgate, Reginald Hargrove awaited the hangman's rope. The idol's fragments lay in an evidence box, their emerald eyes blind to the dawn. Chapter 8. Betrayal in the Mist. The case should have ended with Hargrove's confession in the séance parlor. Yet the night after the reconstruction, a telegram reached Baker Street in a hand I recognized with a start. Meet me Blackfriars Stairs, 4 a.m. I have proof of Thorne's guilt. Come alone. R.H. Holmes read it once, then held the paper to the lamp. The ink was fresh. The watermark, expensive. Reginald is in Newgate, he murmured. Someone plays his part. The game is not over, Watson. We armed ourselves, my Webley, Holmes's stick sword, and took a growler to the river. Lestrade, roused from his bed, brought reinforcements on Holmes's whispered instruction. The fog was patchy now, revealing patches of starlight and the black water sliding beneath the bridges like oil. At the foot of Blackfriars Stairs, a man waited beneath a gas lamp. He wore Hargrove's boat cloak, but the limp was wrong, too pronounced, theatrical. Holmes signaled. The constables melted into doorways. Mr. Hargrove, Holmes called softly. You escaped the yard's vigilance? The figure turned. The face beneath the low hat was not Reginald's, but Dr. Elias Thorne's, gaunt, bearded, eyes burning with fanatic light. In his gloved hand glinted the jade dagger. Holmes, he hissed, you ruined me. The idol exposed as forgery, my reputation in tatters. But Reginald promised a share of the inheritance if I silenced you both. Holmes stepped forward, hands open. You forged the provenance, Thorne. You supplied the dye, the poison. Reginald used you, then discarded you. Killing us changes nothing. Thorne's laugh was brittle. It changes everything. With you gone, the case collapses. Reginald walks free. I take the jade and vanish to the continent. The Magdalena sails at 6. He lunged. The yellow dagger flashed toward Holmes's throat. I fired. Once, the bullet struck the blade, sending it spinning into the fog. Thorne staggered, clutching his wrist. Lestrade's men closed in, but Thorne was desperate. He vaulted the parapet, landing in the wherry with a splash. The mooring rope slipped free. The current caught the boat. Holmes was already moving. Watson, the chain! A mooring chain lay coiled on the quay. I flung it. Holmes caught the end, looped it round a bollard. The wherry jerked to a halt 10 yards out, water foaming at the gunwale. Thorne scrambled for the oars, but Lestrade's whistle brought a river police launch cutting through the mist, blue lamp winking. Within minutes, Thorne was hauled aboard, dripping and defeated, the jade dagger retrieved from the mud. Back at Baker Street, the fire roared. Holmes filled his pipe with shag, his eyes distant. Thorne was the final piece, he said. Reginald planned the murder. Thorne provided the tools and the alibi of rivalry. When the seance broke Reginald, Thorne saw his own ruin. The forged telegram was meant to lure us to the river, quiet knives, bodies for the tide. I poured coffee. Yet you suspected a trap. The limp, Holmes replied. Reginald favors his left knee from a riding accident. Thorne's was right. A small discrepancy, but fatal to the impostor. He produced the jade dagger, now wrapped in oilskin. This will hang them both. The blade bears Reginald's fingerprints in blood, microscopic but visible under the lens. Thorne's dye stains the hilt. Science seals the noose. Mrs. Hudson entered with the Morning Post. Among the letters, a small packet addressed in spidery Chinese characters. Holmes opened it. A single emerald, flawless, wrapped in rice paper. Inked upon the paper, Wan, finished. The Chinaman's epilogue, Holmes smiled. He kept the real eyes, a connoisseur's trophy. I laughed, though the stone's cold fire unsettled me. Will we see him again? Undoubtedly, London's underworld is a small village, paths cross. Holmes placed the emerald beside the reassembled idol fragment. But for now, the horror is exorcised. Outside, the city bustled. Newsboys shouted the trial's verdict. Cabs clattered, the Thames flowed on. 2 men would hang at dawn. A third, faceless, nameless, slipped through the net with a fortune in green fire. Justice, like the river, is rarely pure. Holmes raised his cup. To betrayal, Watson. It binds men closer than love until the rope binds tighter. I drank, tasting the bitter truth. Chapter 9. The Final Pursuit. Thorne had not surrendered with the dagger's fall. The moment the launch's searchlight pinned the wherry, he had slashed the mooring chain with a concealed blade and plunged the oars into the current. The little boat shot forward like a startled water rat, swallowed by the fog before the police could board. Holmes's shout cut through the chaos. Downstream. He makes for the pool. There's a tide to catch. The launch's screw churned. We surged after the fleeing shadow. The river narrowed here, warehouses looming on either shore like the walls of a canyon. Every lamp threw a halo of wet gold. Every splash echoed. I tasted coal smoke and fear. Starboard, Holmes cried. A darker patch slid across the water, the wherry low and swift. Thorn rowed with the strength of desperation, his beard plastered to his cheeks. Behind him a canvas bundle glinted. Jade, perhaps the true idol. Lestrade leaned over the rail. "Stop in the Queen's name!" Thorn's answer was a wild laugh and a spurt of speed. The wherry darted beneath London Bridge, the launch followed, timbers groaning. Above us, the bridge's iron lattice flickered past like a cage. Holmes seized a bullseye lantern and swept the beam ahead. "There! Custom House stairs! He'll beach and run for the docks!" The prediction was exact. Thorn drove the wherry's nose into the mud below the stairs, leapt ashore, and vanished up the slippery steps. The launch rammed alongside. We scrambled after him, Holmes first, then I, Lestrade puffing behind. Thorn darted between warehouses, boots skidding on fish guts and tar. We pursued in a ragged line, constables spreading to cut off escape. The air reeked of salt and decay, every footfall echoed. A whistle shrilled, Lestrade signaling the river police to seal the wharves. Holmes's voice rang out. "Thorn! The tide turns in 20 minutes. No ship will take you." A shot answered. Thorn's pistol fired blind. The bullet ricocheted off a crane with a shower of sparks. I returned fire. The report rolled like thunder. Thorn stumbled but kept running, vanishing round a stack of tea chests. We cornered him at Execution Dock, the ancient gibbet site, its beam still black with pitch. The river lapped below, hungry. Thorn backed against a bollard, bundle clutched like a child, the jade dagger raised. "Stay back!" he snarled. "One step and the idol goes into the Thames." Holmes slowed, hands open. "The idol is evidence, Thorn. Destroy it and you hang for murder alone. Preserve it and you may yet bargain." Thorn's eyes were wild. "Bargain? My name is Ruin. The Ming idol was genuine. I stole it from the Peking legation. Hargrove forced me to forge provenance for his fakes, then murdered to silence me. I'll see him damned first." He hurled the bundle, not into the water, but at Holmes's feet. The canvas split. The true idol rolled out. Flawless jade, emeralds blazing even in the half-light. A fortune in one small demon. Lestrade's men closed in. Thorn lunged for the dagger, but Holmes was faster. A sweep of the stick sword sent the blade spinning into the mud. Thorn collapsed, sobbing as handcuffs clicked. On the ride to the yard, Holmes was silent, turning the idol in his hands. At length he spoke. "The Chinaman's masterpiece. The eyes are the real treasure, Burmese emeralds cut in the 14th century. Worth a Raja's ransom. Thorn stole the body, the Chinaman kept the soul." I stared at the gemmed eyes. "And the poison?" "Never in this one. Reginald's forgery held the upas. This was the prize he meant to sell abroad. Thorn planned to flee with it, leaving Reginald to hang alone." Lestrade grunted. "Both will hang now. The idol goes to the crown after the trial." Holmes smiled thinly. A fitting end for a demon. At Scotland Yard, the booking sergeant took Thorn's particulars while constables catalogued the idol. Reginald Hargrove was brought from his cell to confront his partner. The brothers-in-law stared, hatred, fear, despair mingling in the air like incense. "You betrayed me," Reginald whispered. "As you betrayed Edmund," Thorn replied. "Blood for blood." Holmes turned away. "Come, Watson. The chase is run." Over coffee and toast, Holmes reviewed the pursuit with satisfaction. "The river was the final stage, Watson. Thorn believed the fog would hide him. Instead, it funneled him to us, the tide, the docks, the idol. All converged at Execution Dock. Poetic justice." I buttered a scone. "And the Chinaman?" "Long gone. The emeralds were his fee. He'll surface again, perhaps in Limehouse, perhaps Macau. Crime is a river, too. It flows on." Mrs. Hudson entered with the telegram. Holmes opened it, a single character in red ink. Z.C.A. again. Beneath in English, the eyes see all. "Farewell. Holmes chuckled. Our Oriental friend approves the ending, a connoisseur of exits. Outside, London roared with life. Newsboys shouted extras, a brass band played in the park. The horror of Carthage was caged in jade and justice, its emerald gaze powerless. Two men awaited the gallows. One shadow slipped free. The city turned another page. Holmes raised his cup. To the chase, Watson. May the next be half so satisfying. I drank, tasting victory and the faint lingering chill of the river. Chapter 10. The Veil. Lifted, the case was closed, yet the echoes lingered. Lestrade had telephoned from the yard. Reginald Hargrove and Dr. Elias Thorne were remanded without bail. The idol, declared Crown property, would be catalogued and locked away. The newspapers screamed of curses and locked rooms, but the truth, cold, mechanical, human, was ours alone. Holmes broke the silence. Write it, Watson. The public devours romance. Give them the facts beneath the lace. I dipped my pen. From the beginning? From the telegram that brought Reginald to our door. Let the veil lift slowly, I began. It was a night in late October 1887 when the fog of London seemed a living accomplice to crime. Holmes listened, eyes half closed, correcting only the occasional flourish. When I reached the séance, he interrupted. Emphasize the gauze. The public loves a ghost until the wire is revealed. Continued, describing the river chase, the jade dagger's glint, the final confrontation at Execution Dock. The pen scratched steadily. The fire settled into ruby embers. At length I laid down the pen. And the moral? Holmes rose, crossed to the mantel, and unwrapped the idol. The jade caught the sunlight, lifeless yet perfect. That the greatest horror is not the demon carved in stone, but the demon carved in the human heart. Greed, Watson, greed poisoned Sir Edmund, locked the door, staged the curse, and nearly drowned us in the Thames. Reason was the antidote. He turned the idol, revealing the hollow base. Reginald planned every detail, the forged provenance to inflate value, the upas in the spring trap, the mutilation to sell the supernatural. Thorne supplied the tools and the rivalry. Unwitting pawn turned desperate knight. The Chinaman, Holmes smiled faintly, was the joker in the pack, content with the emeralds and the chaos. I leaned back, yet the public will remember the curse. Let them. Fear sells papers, truth sells justice. He rewrapped the idol and placed it in the evidence box. Lestrade will deliver this to the British Museum, a curiosity, not a god. Mrs. Hudson entered with tea and scones. The street's full of reporters, Mr. Holmes. Shall I say you're out? Say I am meditating upon the impermanence of fame. He took a scone, buttered it with precision. And bring another pot. Watson has earned it. As she left, a soft knock sounded. The door opened to reveal a small boy in a telegraph cap, eyes wide with importance. He handed Holmes an envelope, thick vellum sealed with green wax impressed by a dragon. Holmes broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of rice paper inked in crimson. The eyes are returned. The circle closes. K beneath lay 2 emeralds, flawless, glowing like drops of liquid fire. Holmes laughed, a rare, genuine sound. The Chinaman's curtain call. He kept the eyes until the play ended, then returned them to the stage. A gentleman thief, Watson, and a connoisseur of irony. He placed the gems beside the idol's empty sockets. For a moment, the demon seemed almost alive, watching us with ancient malice. Then Holmes snapped the box shut. Lock it in the dispatch case. The museum will have its treasure complete. Back at Baker Street, evening settled. The fire was replenished, the gas jets hissed low. I closed my journal, the final lines inked. Thus ended the horror of the crime. No curse, no phantom, only the ancient trinity of greed, betrayal, and blood. London slept easier, though the fog would return, and with it new shadows for Sherlock Holmes to chase. Holmes stood at the window, violin beneath his chin. The bow drew a slow, mournful cadence. Lassus again, the lamentations. Outside, the barrel organ had moved on. A muffin man's bell sounded in the distance. "Another case concluded," I said. "And another begun," he replied, eyes on the street below. "See? The boy with the limp. He watches the house. A new client or a new enemy?" I joined him. A small figure in a ragged coat stood beneath the lamp, face shadowed. As we watched, he raised a hand, 2 fingers to the brim of his cap, then melted into the crowd. Holmes's smile was wintry. "The game, Watson, is never truly over." He lifted the bow. The music swelled, filling the room with minor chords that spoke of fog, of secrets, of the endless dance between light and shadow. I poured 2 whiskeys and raised my glass. "To the next impossible door." Holmes touched his glass to mine. "And the reason that unlocks it."